Hi, my name is Nancy Reed, and I'm a core faculty member at University of Lynchburg, and I'm going to be narrating a PowerPoint presentation covering AMA style review. And this is for the doctoral project series, but it will help you throughout your entire time here at the University of Lynchburg's Doctorate of Medical Science. The purpose of this PowerPoint presentation is to review common writing errors and reinforce AMA style rules. We do utilize the AMA Style Guide 11th edition for this program, and we're going to talk about referencing, levels of heading, referring to authors within the text. We're going to go over capitalization and acronyms. We're going to review the proper steps in proofreading, and we're going to talk just a little bit about plagiarism, direct quote versus paraphrasing. You will get more on plagiarism in other parts of this course. First, let's talk about referencing using 11th edition. One thing I like to tell students that we use the 11th edition, and I highly recommend that you do not try and Google rules, because many times the rules that you will find on the internet are 10th edition rules, so you will be referencing incorrectly. So I'm going to show you real quickly how to get to the AMA Style Guide. It is available through the University of Lynchburg's library, and it's very easy to access. So if you open up one of your courses within Moodle, here's an example of a 960 course. In the right-hand side, you will see textbooks. And right at the top is the AMA Style Guide. If you click on the AMA Style Guide, it will take you to the University of Lynchburg's libraries, and you will be able to click on the AMA Style Guide. Now, you'll see the 11th edition there. If for some reason you want to look up a 10th edition rule, you can click on the previous edition, 10th, to look up any kind of older rules. But you will have the entire guide right here at your fingertips. So let's hypothetically say that you want to learn more about inclusive writing within AMA. Should you use the term Black or African American or white or Caucasian? Inclusive language, there's a whole section on inclusive language right here in 11.12. Or maybe you want to talk about what's the proper way to reference cardiology terms such as EKG. And you can click on cardiology and it will take you to the cardiology section. And if you click on electrocardiographic terms, you will see right here, it says the preferred abbreviation for electrocardiogram or electrocardiographic is ECG, not EKG. So there's a rule for just about everything that you could think of in AMA style, but here at your fingertips is the book. And again, we recommend that you do not try and Google rules, because you may end up reading rules that are the 10th edition standard. So let's talk about referencing books. You will have to reference really three things quite frequently. You will have to reference books, websites, and journals. And I tell people, if you get the rules down for books, websites, and journals, you're going to be covering about 80% of the things that you're going to be referencing while you're writing here in our program. You may have some other more abstract things. Maybe you want to reference a package insert. There's a rule for that, and you can look that up in AMA Style Guide. But the three things that I tell people that you kind of have to know right off the bat on how to do without really looking up too many rules is how to do books, websites, and journals. So let's talk first about referencing books. When we reference a book, there was a change from 11th edition to from 10th edition to 11th edition. In the 10th edition, you used to have to put down the city and state of the publisher, but that's no longer needed in the reference for an 11th edition. So the correct way to write a book is to put the author's last names. And you will see here that there is no comma after the author's last name, and there's no period after the initial. So one thing to keep in mind whenever you're doing using AMA style is one of the cornerstone rules is to keep down text. So anytime they can, shorten things up and make it more brief, they're going to do that. So that's why they leave out the comma after the last name and they don't put a period after the initials. So you put the author's names And then you will abbreviate the book title as you see here. And then if there's an edition, you would add the edition. And then you follow that with the publisher. Again, you don't add the city and state anymore. And then a colon, and then the date that the book was published. So again, note that the name of the book is italicized. So here is an incorrect way to reference a book. And you will see here that the city and state are included in the publisher. And again, that's a 10th edition rule and is no longer needed with the 11th edition. If you used a specific page range in a book, the numbers of the pages are noted at the end of the reference. So you would just add a colon, and then immediately after the colon, you put the page range 69 hyphen to 72. Do not use a semicolon, it's a colon, and do not add a space after the colon. So now let's talk about referencing journal articles. The general rule for journal articles is the names of all the authors should be given unless there are more than 6, in which case the names of the first 3 authors are used followed by the word et al. So I kind of have a little saying. It says 0 to 6, you list them all. Greater than 7, you list 3 and follow it by et al. So what we don't want to have is this long string of authors' names taking up a bunch of type. So again, if it's over 6 authors, you cut it down, you only list the first 3 authors, and you follow that by et al. One other thing that I see that's commonly a common error is the first word of the journal article is capitalized, as well as any proper nouns within the title. The next topic we're going to cover is referencing journal articles. The general rules for journal articles are the names of the authors should be given unless there are more than 6, in which case the names of the first 3 authors are used followed by the word et al. Again, we don't want a long string of names taking up a bunch of type in AMA style. So if it's greater than 6, you cut it down to the first 3 and follow by et al. The first word of the journal article is capitalized and any proper nouns in the title. Otherwise, all the words of the title are written in small letters. Journal names should be abbreviated and italicized. And there is a standardization of how journal names should be abbreviated, and that is covered by the NCBI National Library of Medicine's catalog database. And the web address there will take you to that database, and we'll show you how to look up a name in just a second. You should never include things like an ISBN number or a PMC ID number in a journal reference. So if you cut and paste this web address into your browser, as I've done here, and you type in a journal that you're looking for, and we use the American Academy of Physician Assistants journal, you will get a list of possible hits. So you will see here, we'll talk about the first 2. So you see here there are 2, and you're like, which one should I use? Well, the first thing is look at the publisher. Right now, the publisher for JAPA is out of Alexandria, Virginia. But let's click on this one that's out of St. Louis. So when the Journal of American Academy of Physician Assistants began, the publisher was in St. Louis. So anything that you find in JAPA from 1988 to 1994 would be using this abbreviation right here, JM ACAD Physician Assist. But newer journal articles are covered by this. So the publication start date was 1994, and it goes through the current date. And to abbreviate anything found by that publisher in Alexandria, Virginia, you would abbreviate that with JAPA, J-A-P-A. So let's look up another example. So maybe we want to look at JAMA neurology. So when we typed in JAMA neurology, it came up with these two options. And if you click on JAMA neurology, you will see the abbreviation there. So that's how you use the NCBI NLM catalog. So here are some examples of referencing journal articles, and you will see the first example on the left is a journal article that has 1 through 6 authors, and then on the right, an article that has greater than 6. So again, when you list the author's name, there's no comma after the last name, and there is a period after this initial only because we start the title. You would generally put a comma if there is more than one author. And you will see the title here, United States Healthcare Reform, progress to date and the next steps. So you will see that this subtitle, the part that follows the colon, is not capitalized. But you also notice that United and States is capitalized because United States is a proper noun. Everything else is written in small letters. After the title and the subtitle, you put a period and you follow it by the journal name. And again, you'll notice that the journal name is italicized. And you follow the journal name with the year, and then a semicolon, the volume, the issue, and then you would put a colon and put the page range. You should add a DOI. If there's a DOI and a URL, the DOI is what is preferred. You do not put both a URL and a DOI. I like to tell people that's like writing, sending a letter, putting an address with a P.O. box and a street address on it. You wouldn't use both, and DOI is preferred. And you do not put a period after the DOI. So let's look at the second example. This is an example of a journal that has greater than 6 authors. So they cut it down and they only use the first 3 authors. And again, you will see there's no comma after the last name and there's no period after the initials. After the 3rd author, you'll put a comma and use the word et al. And then you will see the title here, and there is no subtitle, but take note that only the first word of the title is capitalized. It's followed by the journal name, which is italicized, and then the year, the issue, and on this one, they have an E locator. And then finally, you use the DOI. Again, taking note that there is no period after the DOI. So let's look at a couple of examples of incorrect and correct ways to reference. So very frequently, I will see people who have listed the author's name looking like this. And again, look at the increased number of text if you put a comma after the last name and you put periods after the initials. You've increased the text significantly. So that's the incorrect way to format names. Here's the correct way. There's no commas after the last name. There's no periods after the initials, but there is a comma separating each author. And also note that there's no period after the DOI. Here's another example of correct versus incorrect. The top example, you will see they capitalized every single word in the title, and that is incorrect. You only capitalize the first word of a title, and then you would capitalize any proper nouns. So Alzheimer's disease is named after Dr. Alzheimer's, and that's a proper noun. So you will see in the correct version, I did capitalize the A. Otherwise, every other word, to include the first word following the first word of the subtitle, all are small letters. And here's another example of incorrect versus correct. So on this example, instead of abbreviating the Journal of American Medical Association Neurology, they've spelled it all out. So what you would want to do is, again, go to that NCBI NLM database and find out how you abbreviate it. And then finally, one we need to talk about is you have to review every single reference that is generated for you. I have students tell me all the time, oh, but I used Zotero and it generated it, or oh, I used RefWorks. Well, the important thing is that even with generators, you are not going to have perfect references. It helps cut down on the amount that you have to type, but you still have to have some basic understanding. So one thing that I see, some common errors is whenever you do use generators, you have to set them to the 11th edition of AMA. That's one error. Or you also have to check and make sure that you're just using AMA in general. I frequently see people writing in APA style and sometimes to the lesser MLA style. So make sure that you're checking your generator and making sure it's set to the AMA 11th edition. So I always tell people right off the bat, you can tell an APA style versus AMA because APA is much lengthier. And you will see here in this example, you will see the commas after the author's names, you will see the periods after the initials, and you will see that they have listed 1,000,001 authors in this example. And look at the difference in the length. So again, in AMA, we want to keep the references short. And so you will see there's a huge difference between APA. So one other thing that you will see is right after the author's names, in APA, they add the date that it was published. Those are two real big indicators that you need to look at to say, oh gosh, I didn't set my generator style to AMA. It's set to APA. The following items are included in websites. So the author's surnames and initials, just like we talked about previously in books and in articles. You add the title of the specific item being cited. If it's not given, use the name of the organization responsible for the site. You want to add the name of the website, and then you want to type in the published date. Now, keep in mind that you don't write the word published before published date. That is implied. But you do have to annotate if the website has been updated, and you also have to annotate when you accessed the website. And with both of those dates, you do add the word updated before the date and accessed before the date. But with published date, the published date is implied and you just put the date itself. And then the URL. And you need to verify that the link still works as close to publication as possible. So let's take a look at some examples. So in the first example, there was no author of the website, and there was no specific title of the website. And so they also didn't have a published date, but you do always have to have an access date. Every single reference you will see here does have an access date, and every single reference does have a URL, and it is hyperlinked. So you need to make sure that every single reference that you have that's a website has both of those elements. There's never a time when you wouldn't have both of those elements. So you can see on the example number 2, there was an author, and the author's name was added given the exact same formatting that we've used previously. In example number 3, the website did have a title, and that was Zika travel information, and it was put out by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and you see that listed. The date, January 26th, 2016, is the day that it was published, and you know that was the published date because they have not added the word published in front of it. That is implied. But there was some new information that came out in August 11th of 2016, so the site was updated on August 11th, 2016. Many times you will have to scroll down to the bottom of whatever website you're on to find any kind of updated date. And then again, you'll see this reference. Every single reference when you're talking about websites have to have an accessed date and has to have a website. And you will see there's no periods at the end of the websites. If you put periods at the end of the reference, it will throw off the hyperlinks. And the hyperlinks are active and they would be underlined. So let's compare real quick what a 10th edition website reference looks like versus an 11th edition website. So the first one is the 10th edition formatting. And you will see that in the 10th edition, they put the website smack dab in the middle of the reference. So that's your key indicator that you are in the wrong format. If you see the website link in the middle of the web address, you know that you are using a 10th edition citation generator and it's not set to the 11th edition. And then again, you will see here that they have the word published in the 10th edition, whereas in the 11th edition, they have dropped that word off. So you do not use the word published, but you do use the word updated and accessed. So that's a couple of sure signs that you are using a 10th edition generator versus an 11th edition generator. So just always look to make sure that your web address is at the end and that you don't have the word published in there. And that will be two really good indicators that you're in the correct edition. We're going to talk briefly about levels of heading. So levels of heading in AMA Style Guide, they don't give us specific guidance on how to do levels of heading. Headings are meant to divide the primary part into secondary parts and so on. And there should always be a minimum of 2. So for instance, if you're using a level 1 heading, then you have to have at least 2 level 2 headings. If you use a level 2 heading, you have to have at least 2 level 3 headings. Headings are used to reflect the progression of logic or flow of thought in an article and thereby guide the reader as they're reading your article. And it also breaks up the article, making it more approachable. So when we do level of headings, our university, since there is no strict AMA guidance, we have developed a programmatic standard for level of headings. And on the level of headings, level 1 headings should be in all capitalization and every word should be bolded and it should be left justified. On a level 2 heading, you will only capitalize the first letter of each word and it would be left justified. And then in a level 3 heading, you will tab over one tab and then start your level 3 heading. It should be bold. And only the first word of the level 3 heading is capitalized. You end it with a period, and then you start the text directly after the level 3 headings. So let's take another look at that. So here's an example of a paper that you will do in PA 910. So you will see that you used a level 1 heading, an introduction, and then you have a level 1 heading, discussion, and then you skip down here to the third level 1 heading, which is conclusion. Remember, if you use a level 1 heading, you have to have at least 2 level 2s underneath, and we have 3 level 2s. So impact of leadership style, SWOT analysis, and future goals are all level 2 headings. So again, if you use level 3 headings, you have to have at least 2 level 3 headings. And here we have 4 level 3 headings. So the SWOT analysis is broken up into level 3, which is strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. So that's leveled headings. And we'll talk more about that as you go through the program, and you'll learn more about that in PA 910 as well. So let's talk about referring to authors in text. Many times we want to mention an author's name within the text. And when mentioning it in the text, you only use the surnames of the authors. So for a 2-author reference, list both surnames. For references with more than 2 authors or a group of authors, you include the first author's surname and you follow it by et al. Or alternatively, you can use and associates or the word and colleagues. So let's talk about that a little bit further. So if there's one author, you use just their last name. If there's two authors, you use both of their last names and join it by the word and. You do not use a first name. You would not use the word Jane Doe and Robert Rowe. You only use the last names when talking about them in text. And finally, if there is greater than 3 authors and you want to talk about them in text, you would use just the first author's surname and follow it by et al. And some examples of an alternate method would be you could use Doe and colleagues or Doe and associates. Do not use the possessive form of et al's. Rephrase the sentence. So the data of Doe et al. Supports our findings. So that's an example of rephrasing the sentence. And there is no period after the word et al. In a sentence. So here's a paragraph in regards to acute compartment syndrome. And we want to talk about the authors and which study belonged to who and what author said what in the text. So you would just add the last name, and then because it's only one author, you add just the last name. If there's 2 authors, you add both their last name and join it by and. And if there's more than 3, you just use the first author's last name and follow it by et al. Or and colleagues or and associates. So you can find more about this in the AMA Style Guide section 3.7. Let's talk a little bit now about capitalization. For whatever reason, medical writers tend to overcapitalize, and you have to be careful not to overcapitalize in your writing. So we're going to talk about some rules here. When you write the titles of medical articles and you talk about them within the text, so you want to say something about, maybe reading an article on free tissue transfer for head and neck reconstruction, a contemporary review, and you put that within your text, you would capitalize the first word of the titles of every major word. So free is capitalized, tissue is capitalized, transfer is capitalized, for is not because it's not considered a major word, head is capitalized, and is not because it's not considered a major word, neck and reconstruction are, and then the first word after any semicolon, so of a subtitle, so this is a subtitle, the first word of a subtitle that follows a semicolon is capitalized, whether it's considered significant or not, and then contemporary is considered significant word in review. So if you write that in your text, you would capitalize it in that manner. But keep in mind, if you use that same journal article title on your reference page, you would only capitalize the first word of the journal title and any major or any proper nouns after that. You do not capitalize the first word of a subtitle after a colon when you use it on a reference page. And again, down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's more on this in the AMA Style Guide section 10.2. So capitalize names of languages, nationalities, racial categories, ethnicities, political parties, religion, and religious denominations, but do not capitalize political doctrines such as progressive, conservative, or formal terms of government like democracy or monarchy. Capitalize the words black and white as designation of race. Avoid using in a noun form. And if you want to learn more about that, again, talking about inclusive language, you can find more about that in section 11.12. So there's some examples from the AMA Style Guide on the right-hand side on how you would utilize capitalization. So like, for instance, Latina women, Latina would be capitalized, but women would not be. Or down on the bottom right-hand side where it says white patients. White would be capitalized, patients would not. So you would capitalize events, awards, and legislation. Capitalize the names of historical events, special events, but do not capitalize nouns that follow the names. So for instance, you would capitalize Civil War, but you would not capitalize Civil War era. Or Nobel Peace Prize or Nobel Prize winner, the winner is not capitalized. So again, examples there for you, and you can find more on that at 10.3.3. So this is where we see a lot of errors in medical writing. Proprietary names. So you capitalize trademarks, proprietary names of drugs, and brand names of manufactured products and equipment, but you do not capitalize generic names or descriptive terms. And you also do not include trademark or copyright symbols with proprietary or brand names. And the reason why that is again, we're trying to keep down on the amount of type. So do not include those trademark or copyright symbols. So you'll see the example below. Diphenhydramine is a generic name and it is not capitalized, but Benadryl is, and it's followed by the maker. So again, you can find more on that in the AMA Style Guide at 10.3.5. So we use test quite frequently in medical writing, and the exact and complete titles of test and subscales of test should be capitalized. The word test itself is not usually capitalized except when it's a part of the official name of the test. So some examples of that are listed below. And like the McNamara test, the word test is not actually capitalized. But if the word test is part of a formal name, it would be included in the formal name, and then it would be capitalized. Here's another thing that we often do incorrectly when we're writing for medical purposes. Titles and degrees of persons. We do capitalize a person's title when it precedes the person's name, but not when it follows the person's name. So program chair Allison Hemmings is to be congratulated on our successful meeting. So you will see program chair, because it precedes the person's name, that's her title, that's part of her title, it is capitalized. But when it is after the person's name, it is not. And the same goes with the example of principal investigator. When it followed Dr. Colvin, it was not capitalized, but when it was preceded, it was. And then capitalization of academic degrees when abbreviated, but not when written out. So we talk about Sharita Evanson, MA, and so because we're talking about an academic degree, we capitalize that. But when you write it out, you would not write out master's degree. You would not capitalize master's degree when it's written out. A little bit more, this you're not going to find specifically in the AMA Style Guide, these examples, but I added them because these are the ones that we see in this program. So names of occupations are not capitalized. So for instance, physician assistant, nurse practitioner, and doctor, none of those things are capitalized. And I think most of us, when we write, we don't capitalize the word doctor, but many times we capitalize the word physician assistant or nurse practitioners. Another example that we see commonly in this program is names of departments within a hospital should not be capitalized. So words like the emergency room or critical care unit, those should not be capitalized. Avoid overcapitalization of medical words. Ask yourself, is it a proper noun? And if it's not, do not capitalize it. Another challenge in medical writing are acronyms. So the one thing that you have to remember, if you are going to use an acronym in your medical writing, you first have to define it before you can use it. So in the example below, we talk about the World Health Organization. And the first time we use World Health Organization, no matter how common it is, you would spell out each word, and then you follow it with parentheses and whatever the acronym is, and then you finish the sentence. Then every single time after that, you can refer to it as an acronym, but you first have to identify it in your writing like you see here. Do not capitalize the words from which an acronym is taking the place of, unless it's a proper noun. So for instance, we did capitalize World Health Organization because it is a proper noun. But let's talk about the example PSA. PSA is our prostate specific antigen is not a proper noun, so we're not going to capitalize those words, even though the acronym itself is capitalized. And again, the exception to the rule is whenever the acronym is taking the place of a proper noun, like in the National Institute of Mental Health or in the example of a World Health Organization. Another thing that we sometimes see in medical writing is whenever they have a study, and the study, they've kind of used a stretch to create the study name or the names of the writing group that makes sense, is easy to say, or somehow relates to the name of the group, but where the first letter of the major word does not match the acronym. You do not use unusual capitalization to indicate how the study name was devised. I think a good example of this is the Clarity study. Note that the L was not capitalized to show how the study's name was derived. Let's talk a little bit about proofreading. So proofreading, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you have Grammarly installed on your computer. We recommend the free version of Grammarly. You don't have to use the paid version. The free version will do perfectly fine for what we do in this program. Once you have written something, you need to read your writing out loud, even if it's something as short as a discussion board. Have someone else read your writing out loud to you. Whenever you read your writing out loud and you have somebody read it to you, a lot of the errors that we find are easily noted when you hear it versus when you read it yourself. And then look for overcapitalization, run-on sentences, and acronym usage. And I like to tell people when we talk about run-on sentences, I see this very commonly in medical writing, what we do in this program. If your sentence is more than about 2 lines long, start asking yourself, can I cut this down into a shorter sentence to make it more digestible to the readers? Sometimes you have sentences, they may not be run-on sentences, but they're so long that they lose their powerful punch because the reader gets lost because they just have went on so long. So ask yourself, is there a way to cut that down into 2 or 3 sentences to make it more digestible to the reader? And then proofreading. Review references, especially those created by citation generators and those from foreign journals. I will say that foreign journals are generally do not do well with American citation generators, so you have to pay extra close attention to those. Make sure that your superscript immediately follows the punctuation and there's no extra spaces in between. References should be numbered consecutively with Arabic numbers in order in which they are cited in the text. So the first citation that you have gets a 1. The second citation that you have gets a 2. Then you list those on the reference page in the order that they appear in the text. So whatever goes with 1 is the first thing that you see on the reference page. Avoiding plagiarism, direct quotes versus paraphrasing. So a direct quote is when you take something word for word from the original author's text. And a direct quote has to have quotation marks. And if you do not use quotation marks and it is a direct word for word quote, that is considered plagiarism. The superscript appears after the punctuation mark. If the quote is over 4 lines, you have to use a block quote. And a block quote looks like this. If the material is quoted from text or speeches, it is longer than 4 lines, it has to be set off in a block, meaning it is indented by 0.5 on the left margin and the right margin, and the wording is made in a smaller size type. So for instance, if you're using Time New Roman in your regular print and you use 12 point, you would have to reduce this to say 10 point. You do not use quotation marks on this. The blocking of it is annotating to the reader that it is a direct quote. Paragraph indents are generally not used unless the quoted material is known to begin a paragraph. And if another quote appears within the block quote, you would use double quotation marks around the contained quotation. So let's hypothetically say that this sentence here was a direct quote from another source. You would have to put the double quotation marks there. A single phrase with a colon introduces the block quote. So you usually just have a short little phrase. It is important to keep in mind, and then you use a colon, and that's what introduces the block quote. So you can use quotations in medical writing, but it is not preferred. Paraphrasing is what is preferred in medical writing and in specifically AMA style. So paraphrasing is putting a passage or idea from another person into your own words. And it's generally shorter and more condensed than the original text. And paraphrasing gets referenced with superscript only, no quotation marks. So note that quotations, direct quotes, and paraphrasing both get superscripts, but only direct quotes gets quotation marks. And paraphrasing is the preferred method. Now I'm going to give you an example of when it'll be a great time to use a direct quote. I wrote a paper in regards to complications with breast implants. And one of the researchers had a very powerful saying in his original text. And I wanted to convey it exactly the way the researcher presented it. And in that instance, I used a direct quote. So that would be an example when you're trying to really do a powerful punch and really drive home a point, and you don't want to take it out of the original author's own words. But in general, most times you should be trying to paraphrase things. Here are a couple of additional medical writing references. The first one is a capitalization reference that kind of helps go over some capitalization rules, although there are capitalization rule review in the AMA style guide. And then also finally using the word physician assistant correctly. There are very few times that the word physician assistant or nurse practitioner should be capitalized. And this link here will go over how to write physician assistant, the definitive guide. I hope you find this video helpful. I know it was a little on the long side, but it's packed full of information. And there is an accompanying PowerPoint presentation in Moodle that you can print off these slides and have next to you while you're writing throughout this program. Thanks for your time and attention.